Well, I guess I should start by congratulating Chatham House, not just for inviting me back for a second time, but for holding this conference. You continually shown real leadership on climate change, and I think that's really very, very important. And whether it's your focus on the science or on the real-world impacts of climate change, current and future, I think conferences like this play a real vital role in driving the policy agenda in the UK and beyond. And while I imagine there's no one here today who would question the need for international action on climate change, there are some who do. So we all continue to have a role in presenting the arguments, both dispassionately and with passion. I think some of you are particularly well placed to help communicate the need for action, and that does remain an important task. And while we must always respect people who have sceptical views, we must also confront those who are in denial of reality with the evidence. And we must confront also them with the fact that we have to step up our actions. Latest analysis by UNEP shows that current pledges to 2020, even interpreted in the most favourable way possible, would only get us half the way towards a 2-degree trajectory. That leaves a lot of work to do to avoid a path leading inexorably towards the level of climate change that is rightly described as catastrophic, and a lot of work to do to avoid a path that leads more immediately to an emissions gap in 2020 of a minimum of 6 gigatons of CO2 equivalent. Any amount of climate change, be it 1 degree, 2 degrees or more, and almost regardless of its cause, places all our economies at risk. At home, intense rainfall, more extreme weather, and wetter winters will significantly increase the UK's existing vulnerability to flooding. That threatens not only to affect people's homes, but also to hit the operation of businesses, with increased threats of damage and disruption, including to supply chains. It could also threaten critical infrastructure systems. We're already seeing the impact on food production and prices. At the same time, in what sounds like a contradiction, but is in fact only a cruel irony, the UK's water resources are projected to come under increased pressure, with droughts becoming more severe. Now, of course, climate risks in many other parts of the world, as you've been no doubt debating today, are far more severe, including effects on global health, political stability, and international supply chains, as well as major price shocks. Significant displacement of populations in low-lying areas such as much of Bangladesh is already starting to look inevitable. So this is the scale of the threats which I know this conference is focused on. So I think it's timely that you're looking at this in the context of security, resilience, and diplomacy. And I do want people to understand the sheer scale and urgency of the challenge. But of course, our government's interest in addressing climate change is not born of a desire to lead a campaign, to start a movement. That's not our job. Our job and our interest is actually extremely hard-headed. And I think this is the point we need to keep making time and time again. We know that climate change represents a systemic threat to our security and prosperity, that it poses a risk to the long-term economic growth of economies around the world, including our own. But, to be more optimistic, on the flip side, we can see that tackling climate change brings big economic opportunities. In the UK, of course, we are committed to reducing our own carbon emissions with a system of carbon budgets, providing a clear trajectory to our 2020 and 2050 targets. And our energy policy, including the reform of the electricity market, which I'll be taking forward shortly through the Energy Bill, is expressly designed to bring on significant new investment in low-carbon energy infrastructure. Within the EU, the UK are pressing for a move to a 30% target for 2020, and I spoke at length about this on my last appearance at Chatham House. We believe a move to a 30% target for 2020 would show leadership at a European level and also ensure that we are well placed to benefit from low-carbon energy infrastructure investments and energy efficiency improvements. And I think European leadership would play extremely well into Doha and beyond in the international climate change negotiations. But to address the global issue, of course, we need global solutions. My colleague, the Foreign Secretary, has championed this. He described climate change as, quotes, perhaps the 21st century's biggest foreign policy challenge, and I believe William Hague is absolutely right on this. The UK is helping developing countries shift onto low-carbon, climate-resilient pathways. We're providing £2.9 billion of investment in climate finance through our International Climate Fund. And as of March this year, the UK had programmed and allocated £1 billion of that in Fast Start funding. And we're calling on other donors to do similarly. I'm also pleased to see some progress in unblocking private finance flows. For example, in India, thanks to WEF and the Clinton Climate Foundation. In the UK, we will be promoting sharing of information and new ideas on scaling up private investment through the Capital Markets Climate Initiative. And my colleague Greg Barker in the department has been championing that initiative in the UK and around the world. But delivering an inclusive, legally binding agreement remains the most effective means of reducing global emissions in line with our agreed goal of limiting global temperature increases to 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. So last year in Durban, as is well known, as part of a finely balanced package, we agreed to adopt by 2015 a global, legally binding agreement that will come into effect in 2020. That is a realistic timetable, one that requires us to make steady progress. Now that means in Doha, we're not facing a one-time only opportunity. We need in Doha to agree a work plan for the negotiations to 2015. But we don't have to bet the farm on achieving everything in one go, and I don't think we will. We are seeking at Doha to build the elements of our climate regime, such as finance, adaptation, accounting, and new market mechanisms, which are needed pre-2020, and which the post-2020 agreement can take further. Maintaining and developing the existing Kyoto architecture will help here too. A number of issues need to be resolved before we can adopt a second commitment to the Kyoto Protocol, but we are working with colleagues around the globe to do so in time for Doha. And we need also to make progress in understanding and implementing the emissions pledges we have on the table from a large number of developed and developing countries. However, as is already clear that those pledges are insufficient, we urgently need to increase our ambition on mitigation before the new agreement comes into force. This means looking at complementary initiatives, additional to national pledges, that can close the gap. An example will be stepping up our action in HFCs and deforestation, and addressing sectors not covered by the UNFCCC, such as international shipping and aviation. We have further challenging issues to address between now and 2015, including how to take account of countries' common but differentiated responsibilities for tackling climate change, by moving towards a spectrum of commitments that reflects the economic realities of the 21st century. The current binary divide between developing and developed countries was defined in 1990, and I believe it's time to move on from it. What we need is a solution that is fair for all and that will enable us all to achieve our 2 degrees goal. In a recent conference in Berlin, when we had a number of countries around the table and we were debating this issue of fairness in international climate change talks, I used some of my university philosophy and the John Rawls veil of ignorance to try to persuade colleagues that if they could imagine if they were a minister at the table but did not know which country they were representing, what policies would they advocate given the scientific evidence. And I think we need to press that case to make sure people move out of their comfort zones they've adopted for a long time to actually engage in this urgent enterprise. A global deal will be important for setting the framework for developing low-carbon economies that will boost growth and investment both here in the UK and internationally. This is the opportunity that comes if we face up to climate change. And we need to ensure that business investors have the clarity, the certainty and confidence that they need to make the investments. And that's as true in the UK as it is elsewhere. And I would refer people to the leadership shown by the CBI. John Cridland made it clear that in his eyes there is no tension between the green agenda and the growth agenda. A recent CBI report showed that the UK low-carbon sector grew 2.3% in real terms in 2010-11, beating global green business growth, carving out a £122 billion share of a world's market that's estimated at £3.3 trillion. So that growth opportunity is there for UK business, and the CBI is a huge supporter of taking action there. So I think the train is actually already moving in the right direction. On that level, I'm an optimist. But we do need a good outcome at Doha, so we can yell at all aboard to investors and businesses who want to join or expand their role in this sector and see this as an opportunity. And I think showing we are making progress in Doha will be critical to changing people's expectations. We should also be motivated by what is happening elsewhere in the world. Last year, for the first time ever, global investment in renewables outstripped investment in fossil fuels. That is a big change. China and India are investing heavily in green developing technologies, both as their own move to a low-carbon economy and ensuring their own energy security. Brazil is undertaking massive efforts to tackle deforestation and can now demonstrate a long-term trend that's seen clearance rates fall by about 3/4 since peak deforestation in 2004. On the industrial sector, the consumer goods giant Unilever is looking at its own supply chain impacts on deforestation, notably around palm oil. This step up can be a real boon for the UK. The trade surplus for the UK green industries was £5 billion last year. 7% of all UK green goods and services went to China. Again, an example of the opportunity if we address this agenda. Of course, it's not just for businesses and investors. Government is engaged in small ways and large ways, and hopefully innovative ways as well. And to give one example, my department's own 2050 calculator is proving something of an international hit. We've got 11 countries, aside from the UK, now exploring and using the 2050 methodology, including China, India, the US, South Korea, Brazil, and South Africa. And that methodology, that calculator, I think will encourage and help people see that the route to cutting carbon emissions is a route to green growth and real sustainable growth. And if you're not familiar with the calculator, I suggest you look at the DEC website and have a play on how you would like to take the UK's path to carbon emission reductions by 2050. So the UNFCCC negotiations are complex, and I don't pretend that Doha will be easy. There are some very significant political challenges with a small and sometimes a large P. Outside the negotiations, this is a period of political upheaval. The Eurozone discussions are ongoing, and that distracts a lot of people. Of course, we have the US elections, and we're all watching those with considerable interest. And the next 6 months, we'll see leadership in China go through a generational change. So those political changes often make it difficult to reach difficult decisions. And of course, we have difficult economic times as well. And although many of these measures have an upfront cost, which may be unappealing to some, the medium-term benefits, I think, heavily outweigh those costs, even before you take into account the severe long-term risks of not acting. So there are these political challenges as a backdrop. There are the economic challenges as a backdrop. But I believe we all know that we need to act, not just because of the scientific evidence, but also all the things that flow from that. So I'm going to Doha with a very clear mission to deliver meaningful progress on the Durban package. I think Durban was a real achievement. We've got to hold on to those gains and plot the path to 2015 and beyond. I think we can do that, and I hope you and others will cheer us on the way and help us make that progress. Thank you very much.